You ever agree to something, knowing full well you're going to regret it? That was me last Saturday when my mom guilt-tripped my wife and me into attending a family barbecue. For context, my wife and I are child-free by choice, and my two sisters, let's call them Lisa and Rachel, each have a pack of unruly kids. Lisa has 3, Rachel has 2, and together, their children form what can only be described as a small, chaotic militia. Their husbands, Adam and Mark, aren't much better, loud, obnoxious, and always looking for ways to one-up me. I didn't want to go. My wife didn't want to go. But my mom called, and when I said we had other plans, she hit me with, "Oh, I just thought it would be nice for the family to be together. But if you're too busy for your parents." And just like that, we were going. By the time we pulled into my parents' driveway, I was already in a mood. The backyard was packed with people, and the party had been in full swing for hours. Lisa and Rachel were clearly drunk, shrieking with laughter while their husbands stood around, beers in hand, discussing something loudly that I had zero interest in. My dad, being the smart man that he is, was posted up in the whirlpool section of the pool, with a small cooler of beers floating beside him. He gave me a subtle nod that said, "Welcome to hell, son." My mom, on the other hand, was frantically trying to keep the kids under control, but it was a losing battle. These kids were bouncing off the walls, sprinting around the yard, shrieking like banshees, and chucking pool toys at each other's heads. Lisa spotted me first. "Oh, look who finally showed up," she slurred, waving a red plastic cup in my direction. "Too busy being fancy to be on time." Rachel chimed in. "Did you even bring swimsuits, or are you too cool to get in the water with the family?" I forced a smile and took a deep breath. It was going to be a long afternoon. After about 45 minutes of small talk and dodging passive-aggressive jabs from my sisters, disaster struck. It started when 2 of the kids, Lisa's 10-year-old and Rachel's 9-year-old, decided it would be hilarious to push one of the neighbors into the pool. She was standing by the steps when they ran at her full speed. She stumbled, caught herself, but still got drenched from the knees down. She was not amused. She didn't yell, didn't make a scene, just grabbed a towel, dried off, and left. Meanwhile, Lisa and Rachel thought it was the funniest thing ever. Not even 10 minutes later, I saw 3 kids running at me. Now, I may not be the most athletic guy, but I wasn't about to get tackled into the pool for their amusement. At the last second, I sidestepped, and all 3 of them launched themselves directly into the deep end. And then came the screaming. Turns out 2 of them couldn't swim, which is insane, considering they were wearing swimsuits and had been hanging around a pool all day. Cue the panic. Instead of immediately jumping in, I hesitated, figuring one of the many actual parents at the party would handle it. And sure enough, a couple of other guests were already diving in to pull the kids out. But Lisa and Rachel, oh no, they were too busy screaming at me. "How could you just stand there?" Lisa shrieked, tears of rage in her eyes. Rachel was equally livid. "You should have just let them push you in. It was supposed to be a joke. But no, you had to be a selfish asshole and put them in danger instead." Meanwhile, their husbands, Adam and Mark, were trying and failing to fish their now ruined iPhones out of the pool because, of course, the kids had been filming their little prank. At that point, I was done. "I'm sorry," I said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "I forgot it was my responsibility to supervise your kids. Maybe if you weren't 3 margaritas deep, you would have noticed they were acting like little lunatics." That was it. Full-on screaming match. Lisa and Rachel were yelling. Their husbands were pissed. My mom was crying. And my dad, legend that he is, was still in the whirlpool, sipping his beer, pretending none of this was happening. Then Mark, already wobbling from too much alcohol, tried to storm toward me. Big mistake. He tripped over a chair and face-planted right onto the concrete patio. Silence. Then, from the whirlpool, my dad muttered, "Well, that's unfortunate." And that was our cue to leave. My wife and I grabbed our stuff and walked right out the front door, leaving the chaos behind. Hours later, my phone started blowing up with texts. Lisa and Rachel were still furious. They accused me of ruining the party, almost killing their kids, and making their husbands look like idiots. One message stood out. "Mark, you owe me a new phone. When are you paying me back?" I stared at the screen. Then, without another word, I blocked him. That should have been the end of it. But I had no idea that this was only the beginning. Blocking Mark felt good, really good. But the peace didn't last. By the next morning, My phone was flooded with messages from Lisa and Rachel. Apparently, they'd been stewing over the BBQ disaster all night, and now they were on a warpath. Lisa, you're an absolute piece of shit. My kids were traumatized because of you. Rachel, Mom is crying because of what you did. Are you happy now? Lisa, and you owe Mark a new phone, $1,200. Pay up. Ah, yes, because I was responsible for Mark's drunken idiocy and their kids acting like wild animals. I showed my wife the messages. She rolled her eyes. Let me guess, they're blaming you for everything? Bingo. She shook her head. Block them. But I hesitated. Not because I cared about what they had to say, I was way past that, but because I knew if I blocked them, they'd just start calling our parents and dragging them into it. And sure enough, an hour later my mom called. I didn't even get a chance to say hello before she launched into it. Sweetheart, your sisters are devastated. They feel like you don't care about their kids. Oh, for God's sake, Mom, their kids aren't my responsibility. They pushed me first. What was I supposed to do? Let them knock me into the pool so they could laugh at me? Well, maybe it would have been better than what happened, she said quietly. I took a deep breath. Mom, you know they're overreacting. You saw what happened. She sighed. I know. I do. But family is family, and no. Family doesn't mean letting people walk all over you. Silence. Then the inevitable, will you at least apologize? Just to smooth things over? I closed my eyes and pinched the bridge of my nose. No, Mom. I'm not apologizing for not letting your grandkids drown me. Fine, she huffed. But at least be the bigger person and pay Mark back for his phone. That actually made me laugh. Absolutely not. Her tone turned sharp. Then don't expect them to forgive you anytime soon. Trust me, I don't. I hung up before she could say anything else. For the next 2 weeks, I ignored my sister's messages. I thought maybe, just maybe they'd move on and find someone else to pester. I was wrong. One evening, my wife and I were watching a movie when our doorbell rang. She shot me a look. Did you order anything? Nope. I got up, looked through the peephole, and you've got to be kidding me. Lisa and Rachel, standing outside, arms crossed, looking furious. I opened the door just enough to lean against it. What do you want? Lisa scoffed. We need to talk. Rachel nodded. Yeah, about how you're treating Mom and us. I let out a slow exhale, not interested. Lisa put her hand on the door like she was going to push past me. You're not going to shut us out. I held up a finger. Try it, and I will call the cops. She stepped back. God, you're such an asshole. I shrugged. Yet, here you are. At my house. Uninvited. Rachel narrowed her eyes. You're really going to throw away your whole family over this? Pretty sure you are the ones doing the throwing, I said. I just happened to be dodging. Lisa sighed dramatically. Fine. We'll cut to the chase. You need to pay Mark back. I barked out a laugh. Oh, that's what this is about? You really showed up to shake me down? Rachel clenched her jaw. He needs a phone for work. You make plenty of money. It's not like you can't afford it. That's not my problem. Lisa's face turned red. Wow, you really don't care about us, do you? I care about people who respect me, I said. And if you think I owe Mark anything after he spent the whole BBQ hammered and screaming, you're even dumber than I thought. Rachel's eyes darkened. This isn't over. I gave them my best fake smile and shut the door in their faces. If I thought that was the worst they could do, I severely underestimated their pettiness. A week later, my dad called me. You're not going to like this, he started. What now? Well, you know the vacation home? Oh no. What about it? Dad sighed. Your sisters called, asking if they could take their families up there for the weekend. When I told them no because you own it, they lost it. Of course they did. My wife and I had bought a beautiful cabin in the mountains for my parents to enjoy their retirement. We covered everything: maintenance, taxes, everything, because we could afford it, and they deserved it. But we'd never told Lisa and Rachel that we were the actual owners. They just assumed it belonged to our parents. Apparently, when Dad told them the truth, they absolutely lost their minds. Lisa had screamed that it wasn't fair that I owned it. Rachel accused Dad of playing favorites. And Mark? Oh, Mark called and left me a voicemail that was nothing short of unhinged. Mark slurring, you rich piece of shit. You think you can just buy whatever you want and leave your family with nothing? Well, fuck you. We're gonna use the house anyway. Try and stop us. I listened to it twice, just to make sure I heard him right. Then I did exactly what he dared me to do. I changed the lock codes. I installed security cameras, and I waited. Because if I knew my sisters and their idiot husbands, this wasn't over, not even close. Changing the lock codes felt like a bold move, but honestly, it was just me putting my foot down. I hoped it would be enough to get Lisa, Rachel, and their entitled husbands to back off, but deep down I knew they wouldn't quit. Not that easily anyway. A few days later, I hired a guy named Jake to keep an eye on the cabin. Jake was a local who'd spent a decade as a cop before retiring early. He had that classic tough but friendly vibe, and the first thing he said when I met him was, "You got family drama, huh? Nothing I haven't seen." Jake installed a few extra cameras around the property and promised to drop by regularly, sending updates whenever anything seemed off. He also warned me it was hunting season prime time for break-ins. That made me nervous. If random locals could target empty cabins, what would stop my own family? For a couple of weeks, things were quiet. Too quiet. Lisa and Rachel stopped blowing up my phone. Mark's threatening voicemails dried up. Even Mom had stopped calling to guilt trip me. I almost started to believe things might finally settle down. Big mistake. The Friday after Thanksgiving, Jake called me around 10 p.m. "Hey, man, you awake? I am now. What's going on?" He sighed. "Your sister's husbands are at the cabin. They broke through the gate, trying to get in right now." My stomach twisted into knots. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. I already called the sheriff. I'm headed over there now." I felt a wave of anger like nothing before. This wasn't petty family drama anymore. This was criminal. I'm on my way. "No, stay put," Jake warned. "Let the deputies handle it." I ignored him, threw on a hoodie, grabbed my keys, and was out the door before my wife could even ask what was happening. By the time I arrived, 2 sheriff's cruisers were already parked outside. Blue and red lights flashed across the dark trees, and Mark and Adam were both cuffed, sitting on the front steps. Jake stood nearby, shaking his head. One of the deputies approached me. "Are you the property owner?" "Yes," I said, my voice tight. "Did they get inside?" "Yeah," he replied, through the utility door. "They also damaged the front entrance pretty badly. Want to press charges?" I looked at Mark and Adam. Both stared back, glaring like I was the one in the wrong. "You bet I do," I said firmly. Mark overheard and exploded. "Are you kidding me? You're gonna do this to family?" "Family doesn't break into family's property," I snapped back. Adam muttered something under his breath, earning a sharp look from the deputy. Jake walked me around to survey the damage. It felt like a gut punch seeing the front door gouged, locks broken, and tools scattered across the porch. Inside, things were thankfully mostly untouched, but they'd clearly been searching for something. They were probably trying to find the new codes or any keys you left around, Jake said, picking up a bent screwdriver. My anger simmered. "This is unbelievable." He nodded, clearly annoyed on my behalf. "Believe it or not, I've seen worse." Word spread fast. Within hours, Lisa and Rachel were blowing up my phone again. This time, though, it wasn't demands, it was desperate begging. "Lisa, please tell them it was a misunderstanding. You can't ruin their lives over this. Rachel, you're destroying our family. They're in jail because of you." I blocked them both again without replying. I was done giving them chances. They crossed a line that you just can't uncross. Then Mom called, sobbing. "Honey, please. They're your sister's husbands. They have kids. You can't press charges." I sighed heavily. "Mom, this isn't my fault. They literally broke into our cabin. They wrecked the gate and damaged the door. What am I supposed to do? Let them get away with it? They're desperate," she cried. "They're having money problems." I almost laughed. "So they decided burglary was the answer?" "You don't understand." "No," I cut her off. "You don't understand. They chose this. They chose to vandalize and trespass. I'm done." I hung up. It hurt, hearing her cry like that. But this wasn't something I could let slide. 2 days later, Dad called me quietly. "Listen, there's something else you should know." "What now?" I braced myself. "Lisa and Rachel, they've been renting the cabin out behind our backs, making good money off weekend guests." My blood froze. "Are you serious?" "Yeah," Dad said, his voice filled with disappointment. "Mark spilled it to me last night, thinking it would somehow justify what they did." I was speechless. I'd spent years thinking I was helping my parents live their retirement dream, not subsidizing my sister's lifestyles. My generosity had been twisted into their personal piggy bank. My dad sounded exhausted. "I'm sorry we never caught it sooner. We trusted them. This isn't your fault. I told him gently, but my voice shook. Betrayal stung deeper than anger ever could. I hung up and sat quietly for a while. My sisters had always resented me, but this was next level. The next day, I called a lawyer. Enough was enough. Jake helped me collect evidence, security footage, texts, voicemails, everything. The lawyer listened carefully and finally said, "You've got a solid case. Trespassing, vandalism, unlawful entry, even theft for the rental income they collected." "Good," I said, relieved but still furious. "What do we do next?" He leaned forward. "We go hard. They'll probably beg for a settlement, maybe even offer to pay damages. But you're in the driver's seat." I nodded, feeling a rush of vindication. "I want restraining orders too. I don't want them anywhere near me or my wife." He scribbled something down. "That can be arranged." I drove home in silence, replaying everything in my head. I never wanted things to escalate like this, but I was done being walked over, manipulated, and used. When I walked through the door, my wife met my eyes. She didn't say a word, just hugged me tight. I knew she understood. It wasn't just about the money, the cabin, or even justice. It was about finally reclaiming our peace. But as I stood there, exhausted, I also knew this wasn't over yet. Not even close. Hiring a lawyer felt like the right move, but it also felt like war. I never wanted it to get to this point, but my sisters and their husbands had left me no choice. They broke in, trashed my property, and had been secretly renting out my own damn cabin. If that wasn't enough to go nuclear, I didn't know what was. 2 days after meeting with my lawyer, I got a call from the sheriff's office. "The DA wants to move forward with pressing charges," the deputy said. "Unless you want to drop them?" I didn't even hesitate. "Nope, keep going." The deputy chuckled. "Figured as much. Just wanted to check." That night, my wife and I sat on the couch, decompressing. "Do you think they're scared yet?" she asked, scrolling through her phone. "Oh, they're definitely panicking." And sure enough, the next day, Lisa and Rachel showed up at my parents' house in full meltdown mode. My dad called me first. "You need to get over here. Now." "Why?" He sighed. "Your sisters are here, and it's a mess." I had no interest in dealing with them, but my curiosity got the better of me. So I drove over, and sure enough, as soon as I stepped inside, Lisa jumped up like a lunatic. "You're ruining our lives," she shrieked. Rachel wasn't any calmer. "How could you do this to family?" I crossed my arms. "I don't know. Maybe the same way family broke into my vacation home and tried to steal from me." Lisa scoffed. "You're being dramatic." "Oh, I'm sorry," I said. "Was it not breaking and entering? Was it not theft?" Rachel tried a different angle. "Come on, we know we screwed up, okay? But this is jail we're talking about. Mark and Adam could lose their jobs." I shrugged. They should have thought about that before playing Dumb and Dumber, Home Invasion Edition. Lisa's voice cracked. "What do you want? Money? Fine, we'll pay you back." I almost laughed. "You don't have money. That's why you were secretly renting out my house in the first place." Rachel folded her arms. "So what's your plan? Ruin our families? Have our kids grow up without their dads?" I tilted my head. Let's be clear, I didn't do that. They did. Dad, who had been silently watching, finally spoke up. "Enough. You two should leave." Lisa turned to him, shocked. "You're taking his side?" My dad exhaled sharply. "You lied to us for years. You used us. And when you got caught, you doubled down instead of apologizing." Rachel opened her mouth but closed it again, realizing there was no way to spin it. Finally, she exhaled. "Fine. You win." Lisa narrowed her eyes. "But don't expect us to forgive you for this." I smirked. "Oh, I was really hoping you wouldn't." And with that, they stormed out. I should have known they wouldn't give up that easily. A few days later, I got a very official-looking envelope in the mail. I opened it and had to laugh out loud. Lisa and Rachel were suing me. For what? Emotional distress. I immediately called my lawyer. "You are not going to believe this," he sighed. "Let me guess your sisters are trying to countersue?" "Ding, ding, ding," he chuckled. "Let me guess again, they don't actually have a case?" "Correct." He told me not to stress. This is a desperation move. They know they can't win criminally, so they're hoping to scare you into dropping everything. "What's next?" "We fight fire with fire," he said. "And we counter with fraud charges for the money they made, renting your property." That wiped the smirk off their faces real fast. After that, the silence was deafening. No texts, no calls. No dramatic visits. Then, one night, I got a call from Jake, my property manager. "They're at the cabin again," he said. My stomach dropped. "You've got to be kidding me." "Nope." And this time, they brought a locksmith. I was already grabbing my keys. "I'll be there in an hour." "No need," Jake said. "Sheriff's already on the way." By the time I got there, the locksmith was long gone. He had noped out the second the cops arrived. And Lisa and Rachel, they were standing there looking busted as hell. I didn't even have to say anything. The look on my face said it all. The sheriff crossed his arms. "So, what do you want to do?" Lisa's lip trembled. "Please don't do this." Rachel nodded. "We just wanted to get a few things. That's all," Jake muttered. "Yeah, and I'm the Queen of England." I exhaled slowly. "They need to be arrested." Lisa gasped. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious." Rachel's voice cracked. "Please. We'll leave and never come back." I crossed my arms. "You already said that. Then you tried to sue me. Then you tried to break in again. Why the hell would I believe you now?" And just like that, they were handcuffed. It was over. Lisa and Rachel took a plea deal to avoid jail time, but the damage was done. Their reputations? Trashed. Their husbands? Fired. Their social circles? Gone. Mom tried one last time to convince me to fix things. I let her talk. Then I simply said, "No." Dad, surprisingly, agreed with me. They need to learn. And that was that. The peace was beautiful. No more guilt trips. No more entitled demands. Just me, my wife, and our very secure, drama-free vacation home. I should have cut them off years ago. But, hey, better late than never. Lisa and Rachel getting arrested should have been the grand finale. I mean, what else could they possibly do after that? But if there's one thing I've learned about my sisters, it's that they never know when to quit. For a brief moment, I thought I might finally have some peace. The charges were moving forward. Their pathetic lawsuit had been laughed out of court, and their desperate attempt to break into the cabin had ended with them in handcuffs. But, of course, that wasn't enough to stop them. A week later, my mom called. I almost didn't pick up, but curiosity got the better of me. She sighed. "Your sisters want to talk to you." "No," she huffed. "You didn't even let me finish." "I didn't need to. The answer is no." "They're sorry," she tried. "They just want to make things right." I laughed. "Mom, if they wanted to make things right, they wouldn't have broken into my property twice." She was quiet for a long time. Then, barely above a whisper, she said, "They're struggling." That made me pause. Not because I felt bad. I didn't, but because I wanted to know just how bad things had gotten. Turns out, really bad. After their arrests, Lisa's husband, Mark, lost his job. Apparently, his employer didn't find breaking and entering a good look for someone in management. Adam, Rachel's husband, wasn't fired, but he had security clearance at his job, and the arrest put that in jeopardy. Rachel had to sell their big SUV just to keep up with bills. Lisa, who had always loved playing the role of the perfect mom with the perfect house, was now barely scraping by. They'd burned through all their savings. The money they made from secretly renting out my cabin was long gone, and since they were now banned from my parents' house, they lost their free babysitting, which meant paying for childcare. In short, their lives were falling apart. And that's when the apologies started rolling in. I didn't unblock them, so they went through my mom. "They just want to talk," she begged. "Just hear them out." "No, they're sorry." "No, they're sorry they got caught. They said they'll do anything to fix this." I sighed. "All right, tell them to pay me back the money they made renting my place. Then we can talk." Silence. "Yeah, that's what I thought. They don't have the money," Mom finally admitted. I smirked. "Then I guess they don't have anything to say to me either." And just like that, their grand apology tour came to an end. A couple of weeks passed, and for the first time in forever, my life felt peaceful. My wife and I took a trip, just the two of us, without worrying about getting dragged into family drama. My phone wasn't constantly blowing up. The cabin was untouched, secure, and ours again. Then, one night, my wife nudged me while we were watching TV. "Check your email." I frowned, grabbed my phone, and there it was. An email from Rachel, subject line, "Let's be reasonable." I groaned. "Oh, you got to be kidding me." I opened it, expecting another guilt trip. But instead, I got something so much worse. Rachel's email was a full-blown plea deal. She and Lisa were begging me to convince our parents to let them move into their house. Not temporarily, not for a weekend, permanently. Rachel laid it all out. They couldn't afford their mortgage anymore. Lisa had already started selling her furniture. Mark was working part-time at a gas station since no one else would hire him, and they were on the verge of losing everything. Their solution? Move in with mom and dad rent-free. I stared at the email, stunned. First, they'd used my parents' house as a free daycare. Then, they used my cabin as a secret side hustle. Now, they were trying to move in and leech off my parents completely. Hell, no. I called my dad immediately. "Did you know about this?" He sighed. "Oh, I know. Your mother and I just finished telling them no." I exhaled in relief. "Thank God." "They freaked out," he admitted. "Said we were abandoning them." I rolled my eyes. "Typical. Lisa even accused me of loving you more," I snorted. "And," Dad chuckled, "and I told her that love isn't the issue. The issue is that she and Rachel are grown adults who need to clean up their own mess." For the first time in months, I felt proud of my dad. "What did Mom say?" I asked. "She was upset, of course, but even she's had enough. They burned too many bridges." That was the moment I knew. It was really over. Lisa and Rachel didn't reach out again after that. No more emails, no more calls, no more surprise visits. They had nothing left to fight with. No leverage, no money, no support. And it was glorious. My parents went back to enjoying their retirement without being used as babysitters or landlords. My wife and I finally felt free from the never-ending cycle of guilt trips and demands. And the best part? I didn't feel bad. Not even a little. Because at the end of the day, Lisa and Rachel did this to themselves. They pushed and pushed and pushed until everyone in their lives finally pushed back. And now, they had to deal with the consequences. For once. For the first time in what felt like forever, life was quiet. No surprise visits. No desperate calls. No guilt tripping from my mother. Lisa and Rachel had finally backed off, and I was in no hurry to ever hear from them again. A few months passed, and honestly, it was peaceful. My wife and I went on trips without worrying about family drama, ruining our mood. My parents were finally enjoying their retirement, without being used as free babysitters or an emergency ATM. And the cabin? Still mine, still untouched, still secure. It was exactly how things should have been all along. One afternoon, I was sitting on my porch, enjoying a cold beer, when my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "We need to talk. It's important." I sighed. Here we go again. Before I could block the number, a second message came through. "We're moving." That made me pause. "Moving? Where?" "So I did something I never thought I'd do," I replied. "Me, not my problem." I expected that to be the end of it, but a few minutes later my phone rang, and against my better judgment, I picked up. Rachel's voice came through, quiet and hesitant. "We're leaving." I said nothing. "We're selling the house," she continued. "We can't afford it anymore. Lisa's moving in with a friend, and Mark and we're going somewhere cheaper." I took a sip of my beer, letting the silence stretch. "Are you happy now?" she whispered. That made me laugh. "Happy? Rachel, I haven't thought about you in months." She exhaled sharply. "You're such a..." I cut her off. "Don't care. Have a nice life." Then I hung up and blocked the number. Over the next few weeks, I got bits and pieces of information from my dad. He wasn't one to gossip, but even he found the situation ridiculous. Lisa ended up crashing in a friend's guest room, a massive downgrade from her big, brag-worthy house. Mark, humiliated after losing his job, moved to a tiny apartment with Rachel and their kids in a much cheaper town. They were broke, bitter, and out of options. And the best part? They were too embarrassed to ever show their faces again. One weekend, my wife and I finally went up to the cabin. As I stood on the porch, looking out at the view, I felt something I hadn't in years. Total, complete freedom. No one was using me. No one was secretly renting out my property. No one was trying to guilt trip me into cleaning up their mess. For the first time, my life was mine. I turned to my wife and smiled. "Worth it?" She clinked her beer against mine. "Worth it." And with that, I closed the book on my sisters for good. No regrets. No second chances. No looking back. Just peace. Finally. Story 2. I brought up my wife's children as my own, covered all of their expenses. However, I stopped giving and moved out when kids remarked, "I'm just some guy mom married." I've always had some fundamental beliefs. You have earned everything you have by hard work, assuming accountability for your deeds, and showing loyalty to those you love. Also, I had to learn the hard way. Mind you, that liking the wrong people may really screw you up. I'm going to tell you the entire tale of how my beliefs were put to the test and how everything I believed to be true about family fell apart. To tell the truth, it's not a joyful story. It's about being exploited, and about seeing when enough is enough. I'm not going to sugarcoat anything. I'm going to tell it like it occurred, because I think it's vital to be truthful about these things. We often hear about happy endings, but sometimes the conclusion is just, well, an ending. And it's okay at times. It's even essential. I'm not attempting to be a saint here. I erred. I think I was too trusting to think the best of others. I paid the price for ignoring some warning signs. But I also learned a lot. How did it all start then? A woman by the name of Amelia was the first. She was a widow. She had lost her military officer spouse. She has 2 small children. One was a newborn girl named Mia, who was just beginning to walk, and the other was a lively 4-year-old boy named Daniel. I met them through a mutual acquaintance, and I could see immediately away that Amelia was struggling. She was obviously depressed, but it wasn't just that. There was more to it than that. She was worn out. I mean, clearly worn out. It was evident in the dark bags beneath her eyes and in the way she held herself. She gave off the impression that she was running on fumes. It was more than a simple case of fatigue. It was a profound, bone-weary type of fatigue that comes from bearing the weight of the world on your shoulders. I wasn't compelled or anything, so I didn't intervene. It wasn't a knight in shining armor situation. It was only I noticed her. One actually saw her. I watched her struggling, and I wanted to assist. I wanted to ease her and those children's burdens a little. I genuinely wanted to provide their lives some stability and support. I first offered to assist out with small tasks like running errands and watching the kids so she could take a sleep. However, it soon became more. I wanted to be like a father figure to those children. Since their actual father was no longer there, I thought I could fill that need. Naturally, not to take his place, but to provide them with the affection and encouragement that all children are entitled to. I suppose you could say that I was drawing a comparison between their circumstances and my own ideals of diligence, accountability, and loyalty. Not because I had to, but because I truly wanted to. I wanted to give them what their father was unable to. It felt natural. It seemed to be the beginning of something positive, something tangible. For a long time, too. It was good. I threw myself into it wholeheartedly. I put in a lot of work to make sure the kids had everything they needed, including decent schools, great clothes, and a cozy house, in addition to paying the bills. The table was laden with food. Everything. I resolved to prioritize their needs over my own, nor was I only attempting to provide for their necessities. I wanted to take away whatever feelings of grief they could have had due to the absence of their father. In order to make them feel safe and loved, I wanted to fill that gap. However, it was more than simply the tangible items. I also provided them with emotional support. I attended every play, soccer match, and school function. I gave the loudest cheer. I was their biggest fan. They replied when I arranged family trips, birthday celebrations, and all the dad-related tasks. They reciprocated my adoration. They referred to me as Dad. Dad too, not just Thomas. And what do you know? I thought so. Yes, I did. I thought I was the luckiest guy alive. I believed I had built a true, devoted family. I didn't notice the fractures that were beginning to appear because I was so engrossed in the concept and my desire for it to be real. I disregarded the warning flags because I was so preoccupied with creating this ideal image. In retrospect, I realized that I was constructing on a shakier foundation than I had initially believed. But I was all in at the moment. I had my heart and soul in it. I was committed to being the greatest father figure I could be and to making this work. I put all of my energy into it, and it appeared to be paying off for a time. We all had our customs, habits, and inside jokes. We were a family. I was certain that emotion was what sustained me. The early indications of problems were minor, hardly noticeable. The children made a few remarks, a little backtalk, an occasional roll of the eyes. Nothing significant. Nothing unexpected from children growing up. I dismissed it. It was just normal teenage things, I assured myself. They were going through a period. That was the only thing I wanted to perceive it as. Once, I recall, Daniel. He may have been 13 or 14 years old when he made a sarcastic remark about how I wasn't cool for not letting him stay out late. Mia, who was a few years younger, added something as offensive. I simply laughed it off, even if it hurt a bit. I reminded myself that they were only pushing the envelope, as all teens do. The disdain increased as the children grew older. Daniel. He was a full-fledged adolescent by the time he turned 17. He began to disregard curfews, reject my advice, and overall act as though he had the right to do as he pleased. I guess it was typical adolescent rebellion, but in some ways it felt more abrasive. I couldn't help but notice the meanness in it. Around the age of 14, Mia began to imitate her brother's actions. She would disregard my directions, roll her eyes at me, and brush off any worries I expressed. They put up a unified front against me, demonstrating their disrespect for both me and my authority. They seemed to be banding together against me, measuring my resistance to their pressure. Amelia's response, or rather, her lack thereof, was what made it worse. She refused to step in. She refused to support me. She would simply sit there and pretend not to see what was happening, typically while using her phone. She would occasionally even gently discredit me. Perhaps she would sigh as if I were the one being irrational, or she would appear as though she was preoccupied with her phone. It was more than passive. She seemed to be actively supporting their actions. She would justify them. They're simply exhausted, I see. Or they're in a stage when we have to maintain harmony. Something was always there. In reality, though, it was a history of condoning their contempt. She was undermining my authority by allowing them to get away with it, and making me feel more and more alone. I began to believe that I was the only one who was concerned with establishing limits and teaching them right from wrong. I was beginning to wonder what Amelia was up to. Was she intentionally undermining me, or was she truly this unaware? Around this time, I experienced my first true wake-up call, but I was still unable to really comprehend what was going on. One night was the actual tipping point, the time when everything began to unravel. Long after his curfew, Daniel returned home. He hasn't phoned, texted, or done anything else, and I'm talking hours late. Naturally, I was terrified, but he like it was nothing when he eventually walked in. Calmly, I may add, I asked him where he had been. Just a straightforward query, wishing for some responsibility. He didn't give me a glance. Relax, he said. I am not a child. That was it. No explanation, no apologies, just a contemptuous dismissal. You're not my real dad, he added. Quit behaving as like you own me, as simple as that. Thrown in my face after all those years of love, support, and caring. It felt like a stomach punch. Standing there, Mia added her voice. Yes, you're just a married man with a mother. It seemed as though the years we had spent together and the memories we had created were all for nothing. Something just snapped inside of me. It wasn't rage. Not quite yet. It was more akin to a deep sense of disappointment. What's the worst? Amelia remained silent. She remained silent as she stood there. The greatest betrayal was her silence. It validated everything. I had been beginning to think that I was just a convenience to them. A supplier? Someone to do the tasks that their biological father was unable to do. That was the turning point. The realization that the family I believed I had created was a fabrication. Shortly after the initial episode, it occurred once again. It was Mia this time. I asked her to clean up the mess she had caused in the kitchen. Easy enough. Correct? Fundamental accountability. However, she simply glanced at me and said, "Why don't you do it?" Instead of really doing it. Isn't that your home? It hurt. The rudeness wasn't the only thing. It was the manner in which she spoke, as if I were a servant of some sort, as if my sole function was to tidy up after them. It emphasized my outsider position and reduced me to a mere cleaner and provider. It was a conscious effort to minimize me and make me feel insignificant. Then, seemingly at the same moment, Daniel added the identical sentence once again. You aren't even a legitimate father. They seemed to be tag-teaming me, confirming their denial, ensuring that I was aware of my position, or rather, my absence in their lives. This time, though, Amelia's response was what truly made the difference. She didn't shout, didn't become irate. They have a point, Thomas, she continued, giving me a casual glance without even raising her head from her phone. You might want to back off." That was it. I realized it was finished at that point. The disdain wasn't limited to the kids anymore. Amelia had made a clear arrangement with them. She was working against me with them, the one who'd spent years of his life taking care of them. It wasn't a hurtful or angry moment. Not at all. It was a flash of insight. At last, I got it. I was finished. There was no turning back. There was no family here. It was a lie. And at last, I was prepared to leave. It was a silent insight, a serene acknowledgement of reality. I wasn't battling for something that didn't exist anymore. I was prepared to release. Thus, I took a step that I never would have taken otherwise. I paused. I ceased to give, ceased to care, gave up trying. The choice was not made hastily or rashly. It was an intentional, purposeful decision. I simply stepped back. I ceased to support them. No more transportation, no more stipends, no more defense, no more guidance. Don't worry anymore. I allowed them to suffer the repercussions of their own behavior. Compared to how I've been for years, it was a total 180. No matter what, I had always been there for them. I was gone now. It was painful. I'm not going to lie. It defied all of my instincts. It hurt so much to just leave this family since I had put so much of myself into them. But I was aware that it was essential. I needed to defend myself. I was aware that it would be difficult. I anticipated their response, that they would attempt to resist. However, I was ready for that. My maximum had been reached. They threw it back in my face after I gave them everything I had. I had had enough of playing the doormat. They initially chuckled. Every time I passed by, they smiled at me, made snide remarks, and made fun of me. They believed they had triumphed. They believed they didn't require my help. They believed Amelia could supply all I had been supplying, so they were depending on her. They were mistaken. They would mock my attempts to establish limits by imitating my directions and making these little punches. "Oh, are we breaking the rules with this exaggerated emphasis?" is what they would remark. They smirked at one another and rolled their eyes. They seemed to be attempting to elicit a response from me by provocating me. Amelia, oh, she was careful to cover for me. She provided the money for their little shopping excursions and ensured that their weekends continued to be occupied with needless spending and fast food excursions. She maintained their ease, their arrogance, and their belief that they were independent of me. I knew it wouldn't last, though. I was aware of Amelia's modest means. She didn't make as much money as I did. I said nothing since I knew she couldn't continue to spend so much money forever. I let them enjoy themselves. They thought they were getting away with it, and I let them. I anticipated the reality check. I didn't participate. I refrained from arguing. I didn't respond. I simply watched, waiting in silence for the inevitable. It was a peculiar patience born by the conviction that I was correct. I was aware that the foundation upon which their conceit was based was precarious and would ultimately give way. All I could do was wait it out. The game was one of waiting. After then, things began to gradually alter. The frequency of the shopping excursions decreased. The trips for fast food become increasingly infrequent. New clothing ceased to appear. At first, the changes are subtle yet evident. Then, more serious issues began to surface. School expenses started to become an issue. Amelia was unsure on how to respond when Daniel got into some difficulty at school. There was no money to fix Mia's broken phone. Daniel missed the ride the first morning. As I recall, he used to go to school with me. He'd always taken it for granted and, for the most part, had never even bothered to express gratitude. Now, he was alone. In the end, he had to rush to the bus, and he barely made it. Based on what I heard, I was out of breath and huffing and puffing. I realize it's a little thing. It was symbolic, though. It was the first significant rift in their cozy existence. And to be honest, I felt a feeling of accomplishment. Not happiness. Not quite, but a silent affirmation. I understood what it was like to strive and have to earn everything. I thought back to my early years when I had to work hard to support myself. But for them, everything had always been handed to them. I, of course, said nothing. I only observed. When Mia realized her shattered phone wouldn't be miraculously fixed, I could see the frustration on her face. I could hear Mom griping to Amelia, and I could hear Amelia's ever weaker justifications. She was beginning to understand that she couldn't give me everything I had, and she was beginning to run out of money. Mia had a total breakdown that day, complaining nonstop about how unfair it was that she couldn't get her phone mended. Amelia eventually acknowledged that she didn't have the money at the time, in a voice that was almost audible above a whisper. Although it was a little admission, it was a big one. It was the first time she had publicly admitted that her resources were limited. Their denial was about to come to an end. They were beginning to realize the truth of their predicament. They were beginning to realize that I, the person they had so easily disregarded and denigrated, had been essential to their affluent way of life. Now that the free trip was ended, they were beginning to notice some hiccups. Although it was a painful awakening, it was essential. My absence was becoming noticeable. Amelia eventually approached me shortly after the phone incident. She was upset. She naturally accused me of being immature and of ignoring my obligations. I was stuck on the phrase responsibilities. It showed me how she really felt about me, not as a father figure or a lover, but as a walking ATM with responsibilities as a provider. She continued, accusing me of being the cause of all the problems. She accused me of being selfish and of leaving them behind, that my behavior wasn't manly. She attempted to instill guilt in me, to give me the impression that I was the villain. All of it was projection. Naturally, she was blaming me for her own shortcomings. I gave in to her tirade. I gave her space to express herself. When she eventually stopped to catch her breath, I asked her a straightforward question. I questioned her about why she had never stood up for me. Why, despite their rudeness, she had consistently taken the side of the kids. I questioned her about why she had permitted their treatment of me. That's when it occurred. The truth eventually surfaced at that point. Because I agree with them, she sneered. Sneered and said, "You were never truly their father, Thomas." In addition to being a slap in the face, it confirmed all of my suspicions. However, it didn't end there, she continued. In fact, she acknowledged that she had warned the kids not to submit to my authority. She responded, "I told them not to let you control them. Before you and I could do it again, I raised kids by myself." The real kicker was that passive inactivity was not the only thing. It was long-term, purposeful, undermining. She had deliberately cultivated their disdain for me and tainted their thoughts. Mia and Daniel were observing the entire event from the hallway, crossed arms, little smug expressions on their faces. They appeared to be enjoying the performance. This is it, I thought at that very moment. This is their true identity. Not the kind, naive kids I had attempted to love and raise, but pampered, entitled brats made possible by their cunning mother. In spite of the hurt and the treachery, I was relieved. It was done. It was the end of the farce. I had my response. There was no room for doubt. There was no place for uncertainty. Without a doubt, I knew that walking away was the proper thing to do. It was a terrible fact. However, it was also freeing. At last, I was free. However, before things improved, they deteriorated. The children began acting out even more, as a result of Amelia's rage and their own sense of entitlement. Little things were the first. My personal property would go. After then, a few of my most crucial work files vanished from my computer. Despite the lack of evidence, I began to suspect that they were playing me. Then, everything got out of hand. I discovered a long, deep scrape going down the side of my automobile one morning. I realized I had to take action at that point. I covertly placed surveillance cameras throughout the house. I kept it a secret, not even Amelia. All I wanted to do was collect proof, and I understood. I managed to get a video of them a few days later, Mia and Daniel in my closet. They were using scissors to cut off my garments while laughing. The vandalism was intentional. I didn't go up against them. I didn't scream or shout. I remained silent. I kept a record of everything. I kept the video. I photographed the damage. I collected all of their menacing text messages, every indication of their growing animosity. While I was covertly getting ready to go, I was playing along and giving them the impression that they were winning. I was aware that I needed to safeguard myself legally, as well as emotionally. I wanted to be ready because I knew things was going to turn ugly. I was collecting the ammo I would need to defend myself, if it came to that, and I was constructing my case. Even though it was a depressing and pitiful circumstance, I was resolved to deal with it as dignifiedly and calmly as possible. I was determined not to become like them. I was going to be shrewd, calculated, and quiet. Seeing a lawyer was the next step. I showed him all the evidence I had gathered and explained the entire situation. He nodded sometimes as he listened carefully. He also told me that I had a good case when I was done. He even recommended a restraining order during our divorce discussion, given the children's growing animosity. In addition, I reported the property damage to the police. I knew I had to report my stepchildren to the police, even though it felt weird. To shield myself from any further charges or legal issues, I had to make an official record of their actions. It was an additional step in the process of cutting connections and removing myself from this poisonous circumstance. Then I packed a bag one afternoon while Amelia and the children were out. I took very little, only the necessities, the things I care about most. I abandoned everything else. The appliances, the furniture, everything material that I had amassed over the years. They had no significance. My freedom was what mattered. My mental tranquility. I placed an envelope containing the divorce papers and copies of all supporting documentation on the kitchen counter. Screenshots of the threatening texts, the police report, and pictures of the damage. The act of separation was formal. There was no turning back. I left that residence without turning around. I got into the car that had a long scratch running down the side and headed out. I had no strategy. Not at all. I simply knew that I had to leave the poisonous atmosphere in which I had been living. The last phase was financial. I cut off Amelia's access to my money and closed all of the joint accounts. I realized that was a harsh action, but it was required. I had to stop her from continuing to condone the entitled conduct of the kids. The gravy train had to stop, and I had to say so. It was the last breakup of relations, the ultimate withdrawal. It was done. Amelia lost it, as was to be anticipated. She contacted me a lot, left angry voicemails, and accused me of being a bad person, a coward, and someone who had abandoned them. She said she didn't need my money and that she could get by without me. It would be better for her if I didn't exist. It was all bluster. She was in denial, of course, refusing to acknowledge the situation as it is. I didn't pick up her phone. Her texts went unanswered by me. I just blocked her number. I declined to become involved in any further disputes. I had made my peace. I had made my decision and was finished. I have to put my own health first. On creating a fresh start for me, the kids then began contacting me. They were first sending the same nonchalant, haughty texts as previously. However, the tone gradually shifted. They began to sound apprehensive, even guilty. They expressed regret for their actions, admitted that the situation was challenging, that they were having difficulty without my help. At last, the younger one, Mia, sent me a message. Only 3 words were used. "You are missed." That was a big change. However, it was too late. The harm was already done. The confidence was betrayed. No matter how much I wanted to, I couldn't go back. I said nothing. I didn't answer. I understand their remorse. However, I remained steadfast in my choice. I was determined not to make the same mistakes again after learning a harsh lesson. They threw it back in my face after I gave them everything I had. I was finished. My response was to remain silent. It was my way of stating that you had to live with the repercussions of your decision. That's my narrative then. It's a real one, even though it's not very nice. And it taught me some important things. The largest: never, ever allow anyone to take advantage of you. Don't ever ask for respect. Don't waste your time on individuals who don't appreciate you. And when someone is using you, when someone treats you disrespectfully, leave. Don't think twice. Don't turn around. It's a challenging lesson, and putting it into practice is even more difficult. However, it is necessary for your own health and dignity. You are worthy of receiving love, respect, and compassion. You have the right and the duty to leave if you're not receiving that. Some people don't appreciate you until you're gone. It's too late by then. Even if it is a depressing reality, it is a reality. Don't wait for them to see how valuable you are. Recognize your own value and behave appropriately. It has nothing to do with selfishness. The key is self-awareness. It's about safeguarding your spirit, intellect, and heart. Reddit, thank you for reading. I hope that my experience may be helpful to someone who may be experiencing a similar situation. Keep in mind that you deserve to be happy and that you are not alone. Nobody should be able to convince you differently. Make your own decision. Story 3. I was always referred to as the family failure by my parents. After being disconnected for years, they attempted to expel me. When I showed up for my grandpa's 80th birthday celebration, my older sister, Megan, always seemed to overshadow me as a child. She was intellectually talented, well-behaved, and constantly received excellent grades, everything our parents appeared to appreciate. They saw Megan as nearly perfect because of her innate drive and focus. In contrast, I was the complete opposite in a lot of ways. I was often forgetful, had trouble concentrating in class, and put off doing anything until the last minute. Academics weren't the only thing involved. I felt that I would never measure up because of these difficulties, which permeated every other aspect of my life. I honestly believed that I was incompetent or lazy, and I had no idea why I was the way I was. It wasn't until much later in life that everything finally clicked for me. Elle was ADHD. The diagnosis was shocking. All of my childhood hardships and annoyances now made sense. The ADHD framework was a great fit for every symptom I had struggled with, from my persistent procrastination to my difficulty to concentrate. I've been able to change my life and approach situations with a sense of control I never realized was possible because to medicine and other resources. As a youngster, however, there was no diagnosis, no comprehension, and no assistance. My parents only saw my flaws. To put things in perspective, both of my parents are extremely successful people. They have distinguished positions at work, are highly regarded in their areas, and excel academically. Naturally, they held their kids to the same standard of perfection. They wanted me and Megan to be the most prosperous individuals in the room. Naturally, Megan easily lived up to their expectations. But in their perspective, I was the disruptive kid. In terms of discipline, hard effort, and quality, I was falling short. Their repeated comparisons of me to their golden child, Megan, only served to widen the gap between my sister and me. I felt like there was something seriously wrong with me just because I was different from her, and those comparisons wounded me more than they probably understood. Megan didn't make my upbringing any simpler either, considering we studied at the same school. I frequently thought that if I didn't complete my projects on time or got into any type of difficulty at school, I would never be able to get out of her shadow or her judgment. She'd shout at me. Her feelings of embarrassment at having a worthless sister like myself will never stop. Especially coming from someone I was expected to look up to at home, their statements struck a deep chord. For the tiniest things, like spending more time with my friends than studying, Megan would complain to our parents about me. She was always trying to convince our parents that she was the superior child. I believe that Megan's lack of friends contributed to it to some extent. She constantly pretended to be better than everyone else and was prepared to attack anyone who made even the smallest mistake. She was a textbook no-no. Not unexpectedly, she was disliked. Instead of reflecting on why she was isolating herself, she intensified her patronizing demeanor. My parents genuinely loved her in spite of her imperfections. They never once called her out for her conduct or pushed her to be nicer or more modest. Rather, they praised her as though she was infallible. They regularly boasted about Megan to neighbors, co-workers, family members, and everyone else who would listen. They throw these lavish birthday celebrations for her every year, filled with pricey gifts, visitors, and elaborate decor. They expressed their belief that Megan should be honored since, in their view, she was the one positive outcome of their marriage. As if you were nothing compared to your brother. Can you possibly fathom hearing your parents say that? My birthdays, however, were practically forgotten. There were no festivities or thrills. The same predictable novels were given to me every year instead of the type of inventive, entertaining books that youngsters may genuinely like. The books were always instructional, with a strong emphasis on the need to put in more effort. For my family, my sister's college graduation was a significant event. My parents were ecstatic when she was accepted to one of the best institutions in the nation. They were so proud of her that they couldn't stop bragging about her accomplishments to anybody who would listen. When it came time for me to graduate 2 years later, things couldn't have been more different. Unlike Megan, I was not accepted to a top institution. Rather, I was admitted to a mediocre institution that was not as prestigious or significant in my parents' perspective as hers. They were clearly disappointed. My father made no effort to conceal it. He told me straight out that he no longer had any aspirations for me. He said that because he was too ashamed to even tell our relatives where I was attending college. All he wanted was for me to be gone from their life. I was devastated by their statements. I wouldn't want somebody to hear their own father almost reject them all because they didn't meet some irrational expectation. My parents said that raising me had been a waste of their time and money, and that they regretted having me. They referred to me as the family's black sheep. Megan also expressed her displeasure at the thought of me going to the college I had selected. She informed me that although she didn't think I would be as good academically as she was, I should have at least put in more effort. It hurt what she said. My best was never good enough for them. I made a choice right away since their comments and attitude really wounded me. I would do them a favor and cut them off if they really felt this way about me and thought I wasn't worthy of their time or affection. I refused to remain in a setting that just made me feel worse. I made a self-promise to forge my own route, no matter how difficult it may be, and to never turn back. For me, attending college was a whole new chapter, but it also presented its own set of difficulties. To pay for it, I had to take out an education loan, and I also took a part-time job to help pay my bills. It was really challenging to manage my ADHD while juggling employment and school. I had times when I wanted to give up, but I persisted. For the first time, I was surrounded by individuals who recognized my potential rather than my shortcomings, who encouraged and supported me, and who believed in me. I began to create a life that felt purposeful and happy with their assistance and the appropriate medicine to control my ADHD. I currently work for a leading international company as a solutions architect. I haven't communicated with my sister or parents in the last 9 years, nor have I followed their lives. That period of my life only caused me grief. Therefore, I've made a concerted effort to cut ties with it. In order to prevent any unexpected meetings with my parents or Megan, I normally stay away from family gatherings completely. This time, though, it was my grandfather's 80th birthday celebration. He contacted me personally and pleaded with me to come. It had been so long since I had seen him. I couldn't handle the shame of failing him on such a significant occasion, because he's one of the only family members who has always been good to me. I chose to go against my better judgment. When I got to the gathering, my folks were already there, I saw. Naturally, I had anticipated this, but even so, seeing them in person after all these years still evoked feelings I wasn't really ready for. I reminded myself of my purpose. It has to do with my grandfather's birthday. I went to quietly say hello to my grandfather, hugged him, and then moved on to say hello to everyone else. Greetings and smiles were exchanged with relatives who were very delighted to see me. They were eager to meet me because many of them hadn't seen me in almost 10 years. Then my parents noticed me, though. I saw the astonished expressions on their faces, as though they were still in shock at my presence. My dad came up to me almost instantly, his face inscrutable, and asked if he could speak to me in private. After I nodded, he led me away from the other visitors and toward a more secluded area of the venue, out of the prying eyes of the other patrons, right from the beginning of the discussion. It was very evident to me that my parents were not pleased to see me. There was not the slightest indication of reconciliation, not even an attempt at polite conversation. The first inquiry my dad asked was direct and icy. "Why are you here?" I politely clarified that I had gone at my grandfather's request since I couldn't ignore him, and he had personally requested me to attend his 80th birthday party. This explanation did not satisfy my mother. She wanted to know right away why I had decided to come up now, when I had never bothered to go to any of my granddad's birthday celebrations, or other family gatherings for that matter. Mom made fun of me by asking whether I was simply come here for Granddad. She questioned whether I had finally woken up and whether I was seeking a chance to get back in touch with them after all these years. I was angry at what she said, but I remained calm. I made it very obvious to them that I had no intention of getting back in touch with them. Attending my own grandfather's celebration didn't require their consent. They could just resume ignoring me and leave me alone to socialize if they truly detested having me here. Mom, however, countered that they hoped they could ignore me, but it would lead to inquiries. According to her, I ought to have at least alerted them so they would have been more equipped to respond to inquiries concerning me. To be honest, she was behaving as though I had broken the law. I told her that she could just tell people that I was doing great in life if they inquired. that I had developed a prosperous job and a devoted partner. When he heard this, my father sneered. "Do you really we'll think you're a successful professional? For heaven's sake, you didn't even complete a respectable college." A surge of rage surged through me. I had overcome several challenges to build my career from the ground up, and yet, before I could fight with him, he dismissed everything I had accomplished with a single statement. "You should go," my dad remarked icily, pointing to the door. "People are unable to recognize your continued failure." I was taken aback. When they asked me to leave a celebration that wasn't even about them, who did they think they were? How was it possible for them to continue to treat me this way? They were completely preoccupied with maintaining their reputation and behaving virtuously in public. I realized that they still believed I was the same youngster they could simply manipulate after hearing their harsh, contemptuous remarks. But I was no longer the same person. I made the decision to give them a lesson they would never forget if they were so concerned about what others would think. I pushed by them without thinking twice and made my way back to where the other guests were. My grandfather came over to see how I was doing after seeing right away that something wasn't right. I didn't hold back. I told him everything. I told him everything I had been told by my parents, how they attempted to expel me, and how they were still so embarrassed by me that they didn't want anybody to know I was even here. My grandfather was furious to hear this. In addition to trying to destroy his birthday by creating such drama, he reassured me that my parents had no right to treat me in that manner. He offered to talk with them on my behalf, but I informed him it would not change anything. Publicly exposing the truth was what we had to do. Fortunately, my grandfather concurred, so I lifted my glass and gave it a gentle clink to draw everyone's attention. Everyone in the room stopped talking and looked at me. I inhaled deeply, composed my speech, and began by complimenting my grandfather on accomplishing such a remarkable feat. I told him how much it meant to be there to celebrate with him, and thanked him for the invitation. Then I changed direction. I expressed to everyone how good it was to see so many of my relatives after all these years. However, I also gave an explanation for why I hadn't participated in these festivities for almost 10 years. Many of you are probably wondering why I haven't attended any family gatherings over the years. Thus, I will be honest with you. My parents were to blame. In actuality, I have always felt like a burden to my parents, who have treated me as though I were beneath them. I lay it all out. I explained to them how I was shunned by my parents, made me feel inadequate, and that I had been branded a failure for the rest of my life just for failing to meet their unrealistic standards. I explained how, without my parents' help, I had paid for college on my own by taking out loans and doing part-time jobs. I made it plain that while I had worked hard to make a life for myself, they had not once sought out to check on me. When I said this, the room became quiet. While some people gazed at my parents, who looked humiliated, others exchanged awkward looks. My dad looked angry, and my mom's face was white as I spoke. I continued after that. I talked about how my parents had treated Megan like the family's black sheep and showered her with opportunity, affection, and attention throughout my whole upbringing. I described how their harsh attitude and incessant comparisons had made me feel isolated, how they had written off my difficulties with ADHD as being lazy, and how they had never made an effort to sympathize with or understand me. I continued by saying that I had no expectation that my parents would suddenly accept me now that I was an adult and successful in my own way. But I definitely didn't expect them to even chastise me for going to my own grandfather's birthday celebration, which I was asked to by the honoree himself. I wanted everyone to see how ludicrous their actions were, because they were hurting and foolish. Therefore, I wasn't being impolite or aloof over the many years that I wasn't attending family gatherings. I was defending myself. I was attempting to recover from emotional scars that had lasted for years, but my parents intended to throw me out when I came here today to help my grandfather. They keep stating that they feel embarrassed about who I am, and that's why they don't want to answer any inquiries about me. This is the reason I wanted to finally confront this in front of all of you. I've finished hiding. I'm done enabling them to make me feel like I'm the issue. Regardless of my parents' opinions, I will henceforth be present at all family gatherings. My grandfather and a few of my relatives began applauding me as I concluded my statement. Then, as a sign of solidarity, they came up to hug me. In contrast, my parents appeared to be stuck in their ways, unable to justify their behavior. They had taken control of the story now that the facts had been out there for so long. However, everyone was now able to see their true selves and the way they had treated me. My parents then hurried out, obviously embarrassed, leaving me to stay behind and enjoy the remainder of the celebration by hanging out with my cousins and other close family members. Several family members have contacted me in the days since this happened to offer their support and to thank me for being honest. Some people claim that I had to have a lot of guts to defend myself and speak out against the long-standing unjust treatment I had received from my parents. Some have even expressed regret for not understanding what I had gone through sooner or for not getting in touch with me sooner. Not everyone, though, is in agreement with my approach to the matter. Some family members believe that I ought to have kept the situation confidential, claiming that I went a little too far in publicly exposing my parents and degrading them in front of the whole family. Aita, read it. I have to add that every single one of your remarks has been really kind. The number of people who have contacted me to inquire on my well-being has truly overwhelmed me. I'm doing okay psychologically, in case anyone was wondering. I grew up with my parents treating me like garbage, and I got used to it. I held that hurt for a long time because it was painful. However, I've learned to advocate for myself as I've matured. The incident at the party was the result of years of repressed feelings and realities. And to be honest, I'm happy I spoke my opinion. I'm glad I stood up for myself and told the family my side of the story at last. Megan wasn't at the party, in case you were wondering where she was. I didn't run into her since. According to one of my relatives, she was on a work trip. I'm relieved, to be honest. Had she been present, she probably would have joined my parents in saying something hurtful to me as well. Megan's absence was something of a relief because she is usually quick to criticize and be harsh to me. Some of you have questioned why, when my parents failed to provide for me during those difficult times, I didn't turn to other family members for financial support. In actuality, I was impressionable, young, and susceptible to their comments at the time. I internalized all of the insults and ridicule I received from my parents and Megan, who called me a failure, disparaged my college education, and questioned my value. Sincerely, I think the rest of my family would share my sentiments. Back then, I found it embarrassing to consider disclosing our private matters to others and maybe encountering further rejection. And because I was proud, I decided to do everything myself, no matter how hard it was. I must stress that my grandfather has always provided me with financial support in his own unique manner. I couldn't have counted on him to assist me with my college costs, since he hasn't been particularly steady. But he has always believed in me, understood the relationships between myself and my parents, and provided tremendous emotional support. He has never condemned me for severing my relationship with my parents, and he is fully aware of the entire story. In truth, I owe him a great deal for allowing me to speak at his party and for supporting me when I made the decision to reveal my parents' true nature nevertheless. I've heard from several family members since that party that my parents are receiving a lot of negative feedback from individuals who were appalled to find out how harsh they had been to me. Since my parents had always portrayed me as the troublesome kid, many of these relatives were unaware of the severity of their actions. They had obviously constructed this story to conceal their poisonous behavior and preserve their own reputation. It appears like their facade is finally beginning to fall apart now that the truth is out. I can only hope that they will be awakened by this public humiliation. Perhaps, just perhaps, they will think about what they have done and change their ways. Even if they don't, though, I feel like I've made my point and have found closure. Second update, Megan contacted me this week. She contacted me as soon as I answered the phone after hearing from our parents and other family members about the events of the celebration. She became enraged at what had transpired and began to shout at me. She was shocked that I had the gall to openly disparage our parents. She said that my acts were selfish and that I was simply doing this to create drama. She felt that I had no right to publicly discuss our family's problems, especially because my parents had been trying for years to move on and live their lives without me. She insisted that I should simply let it go and move on since I was destroying the tenuous peace that had been created, rather than digging up the past. "What do you want from them?" she questioned. "Really, an apology? For what purpose? Just because your education expenses were not covered by them. They were disappointed in you, therefore you demand an apology? An apology is as they always encouraged you to improve. They are among the greatest for you. So please accept my apology." I couldn't resist making fun of her. Regardless of how poorly our parents treated me, Megan had always been the one to support them. She consistently dismissed it as family drama and never showed any understanding of the pain I had endured. She found it simpler to act as though nothing was wrong than to confront the reality. I made it clear to her that encouraging someone to improve doesn't entail degrading or making fun of them for years when they fall short of one's standards. I needed our parents' love, support, and understanding, not just more pressure. I expressed to her how much I wished they had been the sort of parents that accepted me for who I was and supported me through my struggles, instead of criticizing me for not living up to their unachievable expectations. I never asked them to provide me with a flawless upbringing. All I needed was parents who supported and understood me, not ones who thought I was a failure. Megan contended that I might have resolved my feelings with them in secret, rather than disclosing them in public if I truly felt this way. She said that our parents had spent years cultivating a particular image, and now that everyone was talking about how terrible they were for leaving me so long ago, all of their hard work felt pointless. She implied that perhaps I hadn't done anything in my life and wondered whether it had truly been worth it, insinuating that I was simply resentful because they had been correct all along. This is the reason I was finally pursuing our parents. I simply chuckled at what she said and assured her that I had established a prosperous profession in spite of everything horrible that she and our parents had done to me. My achievements had nothing to do with why I had revealed our parents. It was about finally taking charge of my own story after being ignored and silenced for years. I had been cast aside and treated like I was the problem. In actuality, though, I had been the one who had suffered harm. Therefore, exposing them wasn't done to make them appear terrible or to brag about how far I'd come. It was about defending myself and exposing the truth about what had been going on behind closed doors. Megan persisted in her argument with me that I should apologize publicly for the benefit of our parents' reputation. However, I interrupted her. I told her straight out that I would never do it. Since I am the victim, why would I apologize to them? To further irritate my sister, I told Megan that she needed to get her head out of the hole. She had dug herself, and to stop insulting people who had treated me like garbage my whole life. I informed her that regardless of how much it upset her or our parents, I would now be present at all family gatherings. If they were brave enough to face me once more, I would keep exposing them. Why should I allow their poisonous actions to dictate how I interact with the other members of the family? I had every right to see my family and build relationships with them. My sister insisted that I return to my previous level of isolation, as I had done for years, and said that I was simply doing this to make our parents' lives miserable. I let out a frustrated groan. Megan and I were obviously not going to get along, so I advised her to mind her own business and remain in her lane going forward. I refused to put up with any more of her attempts to justify our parents' actions or defend them. After that, I cut off our communication and blocked her number. Ultimately, I had lost all knowledge of her. No excuses, no justifications. Update 3. To start, I wanted to give a brief update on some of the events that have occurred over the past 4 months. Being more active in my family life is something I've deliberately tried to do. Whether they are small, informal get-togethers or major occasions like birthdays or anniversaries, I always make it a point to attend our family's festivities. In addition, I've started making an effort to see my grandfather more frequently and inquire about his well-being. I've also been spending more time with my cousins lately. Whenever we plan anything, even if it's only to go out to eat, see a movie, or do something enjoyable together, I make it a point to participate. Developing those relationships and making new experiences with them has been fantastic. After all this time, my mom finally apologized to me last month. My parents are prohibited on my phone, so it was a significant time for me. She sent an email. She revealed that she had been attending therapy and thinking back on her history a lot. She acknowledged that she and my father had, in some respects, given preference to my sister over me. She attempted to defend this by claiming that because she and my father were raised in rigid, academically oriented households, they had always expected Megan and me to live up to the same high standards. She continued by saying that it was a turning moment in her life when I stood up for myself at my granddad's party and disclosed that I had ADHD. She acknowledged that she later conducted her own investigation and discovered that I did, in fact, have ADHD. She admitted to feeling bad about not seeing the warning signals sooner and for not helping me when I was a kid. She also mentioned in the email that she had been surreptitiously monitoring my career on LinkedIn for the last few months. She expressed her great pride in my accomplishments. At the end of the communication, she also referenced my dad. She said that he is also aware of my accomplishments. She said that he is a very proud man and that it would likely take him a little longer to change his mind and apologize on his own. To be honest, I'm still in disbelief that my mother wrote me all of that. My childhood may have been quite different if Mom had been more understanding while I was growing up. I haven't unblocked her or my dad, though. In spite of her email, I still haven't come to terms with them.